So, hi everybody. We're just hitting 2 o'clock in a second. It's Mike Stevenson here. Just doing the introduction for our next session. So we're joined by Steve Spencer. Steve's going to talk about Azure AD Graph API and managing application access. So Steve, I'll just hand over to you, mate.
Thanks. Cheers. So welcome everyone. DDD community event, which is virtual for the first time, so pretty cool. If this is your first session, welcome. If it's not, you've seen this slide before. So this is all about code of conduct for DDD. So please follow it. Also, if you can, please donate to the National Museum of Computing. That's a good charity down in Bletchley. Been there. It's pretty cool stuff down there. It's worth a visit. And these are our sponsors. So we thank those. If you see anybody from there, if you meet anyone from them, just thank them for helping support DDD. And then we shall tweet and get going. So this is me. I'm Steve Spencer. So I'm a freelance developer consultant. I currently work as a solution architect for Rolls-Royce in Derby, and I've been an Azure MVP for the last 10 years. I've got a blog, so most of the stuff I talk about today, the demos especially, I've already blogged about that, so you can find a lot of the information there. When I've got a new blog, I'll always tweet about it, so you'll be able to see if there's anything new. So there's my Twitter handle as well. So talking about integrating applications with Azure AD, so we'll talk a bit about identity and in web applications. We'll look at how we can manage those applications in Azure. We'll have some B2B conditional access and multi-factor authentication, and then we'll finish off with Graph API. And I'll put some demos as we go along, so it's not just all talking. So hopefully you'll find that interesting. So starting off with identity, if we live now in a world where everything seems to be connected, we've got all these services and applications that we want to access. So whether you're collaborating with other people, whether you're pulling in software as a service applications, you've got your own stuff internal, or you just got a whole load of corporate things like Workday, for example, or Concur for expenses, or DocuSign, or SharePoint, Salesforce, Dynamics. There's a whole load of these services, and what you don't want to do is have to log into all those separately. So if you could use single sign-on to do that, so we log in once and that gets passed through to all these applications, that'll be pretty good. So and then we want to look at how do we get our own applications out there, and can we also wire those into single sign-on, so our customers don't have to keep signing into everything. They can use an identity and access our own services. More importantly, once we've got those services there, how do we protect access? And it's our data, it's our sort of crown jewels. So how do we protect it and only control access to those people who want to give access to? That's where Azure AD comes in. So I'm not going to cover everything in there. It's a big service, but we'll talk a bit about identity services. So authenticating, so proving who you are. And then we've got authorization of what you can give you access to, and as part of that there'll be user management. So we've got users in there, and we can set people up with groups, whether that's an on-prem group that's synchronized in Azure, whether it's an Azure only group, or you've got a bit of both. It's pretty flexible. So and then in order to get applications in there, we need to manage them. So a lot of the time we build these applications, but how do we get our Azure AD as the identity service for those applications? So that's where application management comes in. And as part of that, I've talked about single sign-on. So it supports a number of protocols. So SAML, OpenID Connect, OAuth 2, WS Federation. You can do direct federation through ADFS and a few others. So I'm not going to talk about how we do that today. We'll just talk. One of the demos I'm using uses OpenID Connect, so I'll show how easy that is to set up. I'll talk also about how we get our external users in through B2B, and then protect access using conditional access and multi-factor authentication. So when we're talking about application management, if you're in the Azure portal, there's two areas you need to look at. One is app registration, and the other's enterprise applications. They're both linked. So if you create an app registration, it'll automatically create you an enterprise application, and by and large they're separated by app registration is all about configuration and single sign-on, and enterprise applications about how you access those applications. Although I've got one of my services that I'm managing at Rolls-Royce, and that uses SAML, and that's managed through an enterprise application. So I can go in there and look at the data that's going into the SAML token and put some rules in place to make sure I get the right claims through. So there's a bit of an overlap in places, but generally, if you're configuring your app up, you go to the app registration, and if you want to give people access to it, you go to enterprise application. So you can give users access directly, so you can go into the application, assign users. But if you've got the premium P2 subscription for Azure AD, you can also assign groups to applications. So it makes it a lot easier to manage. So instead of having everybody in the same app, you can put different groups in there and set them up. You can also use, if you've got one of the premium licenses, you can use conditional access to control sort of the access to these applications as well. So put some rules in place. I'll talk about that a bit later. So as I said, we'll go some demos. So the first thing I'm going to show you, this is a set of samples that Microsoft have built. So, and I've used this as my basis for my demo. So there's a whole load of AD quick starts, and it's got a lot of different services in there. And I'm using the OpenID Connect one. So it's a C# ASP.NET web app. And I've already put this link's already on my blog. So if you need to get it, just nip onto a blog, you'll see it there. And I've got that running in Visual Studio. There we are, and we'll show you the how it works. So in the startup class, there's some configuration that relates to the application that we're trying to connect to, and we need to grab this information from Azure AD. So I've got a number of. Oops, gone too quick. In Azure AD, we've got app registrations. We've also got enterprise applications. So this is just I've gone to the Azure portal. I've clicked on Active Directory, and then I've clicked through to app registrations. And I've got one here I've configured that I can run locally. And the information that we need out of here is pretty much these two bits of information: the client ID and the tenant ID. So if we go back to here, we've got a client ID, a tenant ID, and the redirect URI is basically telling Azure AD where to go to after you've signed in and you've been authorized access. It redirects you to your website, and that's configured in Azure AD as well. So you'll see somewhere, there it is. So under here, we have that URL. So this is localhost on my machine. So that's when I run it in Visual Studio. That's what we get. I've also had to configure the ID token up because I'm using OpenID Connect, so we need an ID token. And I'll talk a bit more about this in a sec. I'll create a new one, and you can see exactly what all the steps I went through. So that's what we need. We need to configure these bits up. The rest of this class is just about setting up. This is all standard. This is about how OpenID Connect works. I've also added a bit at the end somewhere, wherever it is, here, which is a bit of a custom claim. So all I'm doing is pulling the client ID through, so that when we look at the claims back a bit later, we'll be able to see when I swap applications around. You'll be able to see the application swapped. You'll be able to see that. And all a claim is effectively a list of facts about you. So when you sign in, you'll get these facts passed through in the security token. They come through as what's called claims. So the website itself basically displays this section here, effectively goes through all the claims and just lists them out for us. So we'll be able to see all the claims that come through in your token as part of the site. And all this is doing is it's going to pull some basic data through from the claim, so that we can display it in the thing. I've also got a bit later on, we'll talk about this, but I've got some calling to a NASA API to pull some data back, which we'll use when we get to the end. So I'll talk a bit about that later. And that's pretty much the application. So fairly easy. What we'll do now is I'll go and create a new one, so you can see what we do to go it. So go to app registrations and click new registration. It's fairly straightforward. I just need to copy the URL. Hang on a sec. So we're going to give this a new name, so we'll call it DDD 2020. We're only going to do single tenant, so we just want using my own single Azure AD, and we need to put that URL that we that we had earlier, and click register. So what this has done is created a new app registration. So we need to copy this, and we'll save that for later. We also need to do a bit more configuration. So the first thing to do is, remember I showed you in the other one, we needed to enable the ID token. So this allows the data to be passed through in OpenID Connect. So that's the first thing to do. The other thing we need to do is add some extra permissions. So it'll help if I saved. So we do some extra permissions. So this app currently uses Graph API to just get your basic profile information. But what we also need to do is allow it to read all your profile. So we do add permissions on there, and here's a whole load of APIs we could assign to this application and give a set of permissions for. But we're only interested in Microsoft Graph. And when you go to Microsoft Graph, there's two options. First one is what's called delegated permission. So this is basically saying the person who's logged into the site pass their identity down into the Graph API, and we'll delegate that permission. The other one is what's called an application permission. That works like a service account. So I'll talk a bit about this when we get onto the Graph API piece, because we're going to be using application permissions for that. So I need a delegated permission. It's currently set up with user read, but I need user read all. So if we look for user in here, and I just select user read all from the list. So I've got a whole load of other ones we could do. We click add permission. What this has done now is added the permission, but this is an administrative permission. So if I signed in now and I wasn't an administrator, it wouldn't let me get any further because you need to be an administrator. What we can do is say, well, actually, we're going to grant admin consent for this application. So this allows us to use that as part of this application. So we're saying anybody who signs in will be able to read their user's full profile. And that's pretty much that set up. So if we look back into here, we have a managed application. This is our enterprise application that was created as well. So you can see that's in there. And we'll come back to this in here because there's some settings in here that we need to do. So if we go back to our service, and we'll just add in, I copied the client ID. Hopefully I didn't copy something else as well. And we will uncomment that one, uncomment that one. And what we've done now is I've just swapped the application over. So when we run it, remember that I had that custom claim. We should see that ID pass through as that custom claim. So if we run this now, so just wait for this to spin up. So it's building. When it's finished, the website should pop up. Hopefully it'll pop up on this screen. There we are. When it eventually gets here, we'll be able to log in, hopefully. Come on. There we are. So what I can do now is I can sign in. So this is now, oops, I must have been signed in previously. So let's see who I was signed in with. So this is good. That was a user I was hoping. So this is the set of claims that we saw that the controller pulled out, and then this set here is all the other ones, and you can see that there is the application that we created. So 9BC4, so 9BC4, yeah. So that's the same application ID. So you can see it's using a different application now. Now, what we did there though, as I didn't have to assign that user to the application; he just signed straight in. So what we actually want to do is control access to this app. So we don't want anybody to have access to it because it's quite a critical one for our business. So what we can do is we go back into the enterprise application and we look at the properties. So we have this setting here, user assignment required. So at the moment it says no, which means anybody anybody can sign into it. So we click that to do yes and hit save. So if I go back now and run this, this shouldn't allow me to get in. So I'll try and sign in again. when it starts. Here we are. So if I do sign in, it'll ask me for my account details. And then I've got an error. I mean, it's not a very useful error, this one, but if you look that up, that does basically say that there's no user assigned. So go back into here, and I can go to users and groups, and I can go add user, and then find my user. And assign. And there we go. So if I now go back to here and sign in, that should let me in this time. And there we are. So that's now giving us some control over who we get access to. So I've got the application using Azure AD as the identity provider. I've also now protected it so that only people I want to access can access this site. So we'll go back to the slides. So that was showing you how to connect Azure AD up. What we're going to talk about now is how do we get customers into the site. So there's a service as part of Azure AD called B2B, business to business. So it's a mechanism that allows our users from external organization to access our resources, our websites, our SharePoint sites, whatever we want. And the way it works is you send an invitation out. So you basically send them, you put their email and a bit of data in there. You can customize the message and you send the invite out. That user will then receive an email, and then they can click through and accept it. If their organization also has Azure AD, then when they sign in, they'll be able to use the ID related to their email, and it means that they sign into their own AD rather than ours. So we don't have to worry about managing their external accounts and passwords. However, not everybody has got Azure AD, so there is a mechanism for that. It's called just in time. So what that does is it looks exactly, from our point of view, we don't see any different. We just send an invitation out to an email. But if you're doing just in time, what will happen is when you sign in, when you click that accept, Azure knows that you've not got an Azure AD associated with your email, and what it does, it just prompts you for a password. And then there's some self-service password management stuff. So again, you don't have to worry about it. You probably need to just understand that if you get a support call in, that they need to go through and click the link on the login page or whatever. So there is, from a support perspective, you probably need to understand a bit more about whether they're an AD user or a just-in-time user. And to actually put some governance around this, there's a service called Entitlement Management, and what this allows us to do is effectively you can group a set of resources together, whether that's groups, SharePoint sites, applications, or whatever. You can group them together in what's called access packages, and then you can assign policies to those. Those policies can then determine whether internal or external users can access it, or how long they've got access for, that sort of thing. And then a user can either request access, or we can use administrative assignment of those applications, so that they won't actually know that these assignments are there, but we can assign it to them. So as part of that access policy, we can create an approval workflow. So if a B2B user requested access, that could kick an approval workflow off, which might go to one of their people in their organization first, potentially, and then if they approve it, it goes to somebody in our organization. However we want to do it, you've got a bit of control over what you want. We can also put limits on it, so I can put an expiry time or a number of days that you want. So you could do like a 30-day trial, for example, and it would expire after that time. And we also have a feature called automated access reviews. So what that does is periodically, so 3 months, 6 months, whatever, an email will be sent to that user, and it says, do you still have access to this? And if they say yes, and it carries on. If they say no, then they get removed. And I believe if you also ignore that, then it would also remove you after a period of time as well. So that's pretty good. So this just puts us a bit of governance around what you want to do. It also makes it easier. So, for example, if you've got a team that they need access to a SharePoint site, 2 applications, teams, a couple of groups to give them the right licensing or whatever, then you could create an access package for them. And it just means you just assign one access package rather than sort of having to go through and make sure you haven't missed anything. So it's pretty good. So just sort of as a picture of this, so we've got this what's called a catalog. So the catalog allows you to group a set of resources together and then assign a manager to that. So it means you don't have to always have an IT administrator doing this. So it could be delegated down to the business and say, well, actually, you've got control over these 2 groups, this app and this site, and then you can create access packages. So they've created one access package for sort of an internal user and another one that's a mix. So the different policies depend on who they are. So it may be that the external user policy requires them to do MFA, for example, and then each of the internal external can request access. So conditional access, I've mentioned this briefly as we've gone along. That's a premium P1 license is required. So doesn't come as standard with Azure AD. So the one you always get with every subscription, you'll get an Azure AD tenant, but that's the standard one. The way this works is it gathers a load of data from what's called signals from whether that's you, where you're signing in from, the device you're signing in from, the application you're trying to access, and also some real-time AI risk. So a bit like your fraud detection on your credit card, it determines that whether the behavior sort of looks abnormal. So if you've signed in today, so like I'm based in Derby, so if I'm signing in from the office in Derby and then suddenly I get the same login in South Africa or Russia or wherever, then it's obviously that I can't get there quick enough. So there's something gone wrong. So that will be able to do something based upon that logic. And that next stage is what's called a decision. So the decision is, do we allow access? Do we require multi-factor authentication, or do we block access? And that's based on the rules that we put in place, based on the signals we've got. And then there's enforcement of that. So if it's allow access, you'll get straight in. If it's MFA, you'll go through the MFA route and block access. And then you can set different rules up for whether they're internal users or guest users. For example, an internal user on the company laptop on the corporate network, then access is accepted. Otherwise, it's MFA. So we might also set something up that says we know that you always log in from your corporate network. We don't want you to log in from anywhere else. So we'll whitelist or allow list your IP range for your corporate network, and then if any logins outside of that, then we'll block access. So we do quite a few things. That brings us nicely onto multi-factor authentication. So we've already signed in. We've put our what we know. So that's your username and password, and then this is something that we own. So I've got a second device which I'll be prompted to do something after I've signed in normally. So we can use condition, as I said previously, conditional access can be determined when MFA was required. But if you've got the standard AD, which is what you get with your normal Azure subscription, then you can turn it. You can enable AD. You can enable multi-factor authentication, but there's no conditional access. You can't put the rules. It's either on or off. And in the standard pack, you get just Microsoft Authenticator app, and I believe this is all you get if you want to do B2B as well. So, but if you're on a premium license and you're an internal user, then you can use an OAuth hardware token, SMS, or voice calls. So there's a bit more flexibility there. And if MFA is required, then there's a process to go through and set it up like you would do if you were using it at your bank or whatever else. So it's a fairly standard approach. And it's fairly easy to set up, and you just be asked to put an extra code in when you sign in, and either your OAuth token will give you that code, or your app will give you the code if you've got a text message, or somebody's rang up and told you what it is. So fairly easy to set up. And the final thing in this section is talk about custom application roles. So with Azure AD, we can add role-based access control to your applications fairly easily. So in your enterprise application, you can go in and create some roles. and then you can assign users and groups to those in that application with those roles. So you may have added 10 roles, so you could actually assign a user to multiple roles within that, and you'll see in the enterprise application window where the users are, that user will appear a number of times with different roles against them. And what that means then is when you sign in with those roles that you've got been assigned will automatically appear in your access token as role claims, and we can look at those in code. So I'll show you that in a second, which means you can customize the user experience based upon which roles those users have been assigned. So it's pretty powerful. So we'll do some demos now. Let's sign out of here. I noticed when I was doing that demo previously that I haven't deleted one of my users. Cool. So with B2B, I want to add a user. So if I click new user, that would create a new user in my Azure AD tenant. So what I want to actually do is create a guest user. So in the B2B world, what we're talking about is a guest user to B2B user. So I can click that, and it'll send the invite. So what I want to do is put an email. Oops, wrong way around. So we're going to create a new identity called test for this email address, and we can put a personal message in there and click invite. And what that's done now is that will go away and send an email to that email address. And when it arrives, it'll look something like this without the red box around. So the red box is just showing you that text I just put in there that would appear in there, and the user can then click accept to accept the invitation. So what we'll do is I need to run my app again. I'm just going to swap this back. So we've gone back to the original tenant. So we'll start this application up. Actually, it won't work because I've not assigned you. Assigned me. So what I need to do as well is I need to go and assign myself into that application. So remember that this has been set. This application has been set to require a login. Require assignment before you can do a login. This is taking its time. Okay, so we'll assign a user to this, and I will go add user. A test, which is what I set up. It's asking me to prompt for a role because I've already got roles set up in here. So you can see I've got two different roles: test admin and user. So we'll just assign the user role to this one for now. And what that will allow me to do now is to sign in. So if I go into here and pick so I can't talk and type passwords at the same time. That's okay. So this is if they'd have invited the application, I haven't accepted the invite for this user. I just invited them. So you would get this as part of the invitation anyway. But this is saying I want you to access Steve's applications and give you permission to read your profile. So that basically that permission that we asked for. So this is now going away and allowing me access, and then we've come in. So this should pull through now. So this is that email address, and again it's a different client ID, so it's showing it's a different application. And that's now this B2B user has now got access to our application. That's pretty useful. So the next thing we need to do is I want to look at is custom claims. So we go back into the app registration, and if we look down here, there's this thing called app roles. Click through to here, and these are the two that I showed you that appeared when I assigned that user. So it's a fairly easy thing to do. You create a new one, and we'll call this one test.nasa. We assign it. We're going to assign it to users and groups, and we'll give it a value. I'll give it the same. What this does is it says allows the user to see the NASA picture of. So I've got an API. NASA's got an API that allows you to pull this picture back. And what I've done is I've put some conditional parts on my web page that will only show that if you've got this, if you've been assigned this this role. So we'll apply that. We'll go back to the enterprise application. We'll go back to users and groups, and we'll do add user. And this time, I don't know if you noticed actually when I assigned this, it said test there, but because I've already signed in with it now, it's pulled that information through from my account, so it's pulled my name through. So I'm going to add that user into there. And this time, well, that's annoying. Maybe I was a bit too quick. Using groups, add user. Select role. There we are. It's coming through that. So it took a bit of time just to propagate through. So I'm giving that user the test.nasa role. So if we look at this, there's this one here which I assigned originally, which had the user role, and then I've got this one here, same account, but this time it's got the NASA role. So if we go back to the application, there's a couple of ways that we can do this. So we can use the authorize on the class. So I could put this in here, and that means that any user with test admin user or test.nasa roles will be able to access anything on the controller, or you can do it at an action level. So at each action you can put in, say this one means that if I signed in now, I wouldn't be able to sign in because I didn't assign the test admin role to me. I assigned the test.nasa. So we'll just get rid of that for now. But it's pretty useful. So I can put some two levels. So we can put permissions on the controller, but also on in the front end, I've added a couple of bits. So the first one is if the user's in the role, if they're authenticated and have the role test.nasa, then we'll show this bit. And it's basically just pulls the picture through and shows it on the screen. I've also added another one down here. So if it said test.admin, you would get you are an administrator displayed on the screen. So just showing a couple of ways that you can actually control access to the data. And we should see when we go through this claim, we should see that this user now has a user role and a test.nasa role. So if we start this up again, oops, I'm already running it. So hopefully this will ask me to sign in. Oh, it's already got me. I've already signed in, so my token's already been cached. So it hasn't pulled through the new roles that we've just added. So let's try again. So we'll sign in with this one. Okay, let's fingers crossed this is where, there we are. So that's pulled through the picture of the day. Unfortunately, it's not the best one today. We've had some really nice ones over the last week when I've been practicing this. So, and it gives you a bit of information about what the picture's about. And also, if we look down here, we've got two roles now. So we've got that user role and the NASA role. So we've got a way of passing that information through. So pretty useful. Bring the slides back up now. So I've shown you about setting the applications up in Azure AD. Also, how do we invite B2B users in and custom roles. So what we're looking at now is I want to automate some of this. So I want to be able to automate inviting users in, or I want to add them to the groups or add them to applications. So this is where Microsoft Graph comes in. So Microsoft over the past few years has been sort of amalgamating all their APIs into one sort of single endpoint, the graph.microsoft.com endpoint, and they're pulling in a lot of data from all over the place. So Azure, Office 365, that sort of thing. And as you've seen with the user permissions, those are controlled in AD. So in the application, I can go through and add the permissions I need for each application. And each API call needs a specific set of permissions, and the documentation is pretty good, and I'll show that in a bit. And there's actually two APIs. There's the one that's generally available, so it's production ready, and then there's a beta one, and it's comes as native in REST, but then there's some language specific ones, so C#, JavaScript, Java, Objective C, and I think maybe some others. But we're looking at the C# one today, and that uses two different NuGet packages. So if you want the production one, you'll just install that package. If you want the beta one, you'll install that package. So you can't have them both running at the same time. You have to swap. But the beta contains so the publicly available one is a subset of the beta one, effectively. So if you've got the beta one, you've got all the GA ones that are there anyway. And it's got sort of three main areas at the moment. It's growing every time I go and look at it. There seems to be more stuff in there. So it has identity and access management, which is good because that's what I want to show you. Productivity, so that's like your Outlook stuff, so calendars, files, mail, contacts, that sort of thing, and then collaboration, so Teams, SharePoint, and Planner. So you've got access to these, and depending on what you're trying to do, you'll either log in as a delegated user or as an application user. So we'll just jump. I don't think there's much more to talk about this. I'll just show you it straight as a demo. It's probably the easiest way to do it. So what we've got is I've downloaded I think this is running the beta one. So you can see I've got the beta NuGet package in there. If it was production, it would just say Microsoft Graph. So we're using the beta one, and this application is fairly simple. It's gonna take an email address and a group, and it's gonna add the user and delete them and invite them. Depending on what status that user is, it will do various things. So you need some information. So client ID and tenant ID we've already talked about. That's what we needed when we were looking at the OpenID Connect stuff. But then we've also got this client secret that we need. So because I'm using the application identity rather than the delegated one, we need to create that. So if we go back into our app registration, and then there's this certificates and secrets panel, we can click new client secret and set up whether we want it to expire, and just click add. It's fairly straightforward, and it gives you an ID. So copy that now, because as soon as we've navigated off this page, you'll not be able to get that back. And the only way to, if you forget what it is, the only way to do it is to delete this and start again and create a new one. So we've copied that. I've already set it up, so I'm not gonna use it. So we'll get rid of that for now. But that's all you need to do. Create that client secret, and then in here we pass that through as a secret. And these effectively, these 4 lines is what we need to create a graph client. So the first one is on creating the application login. So it's saying create the application rather than the delegated one. Pass that into the auth provider, and then pass the auth provider into the graph service client. And this handles all the security tokens you need to grab behind the scenes. So this will do all the effectively uses ADAL to do all that. We're gonna enter an email address and a group, and then we're going to jump through and actually do some work. So first thing we want to do is get that user. We're going to use the filter option on here. So each request is built up in a similar way. We'll have an endpoint, and this is the client, and this is the endpoint. So we're looking at the user's endpoint. We're calling the request. We pass some options through. We then going to use the filter. So this is just use a no data format for filtering, and it's basically saying, find me any users that have an email address that matches this, and then you do async await. So this is going to return the user. If that user is not null, that means it's found one. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to go and say, I'm going to see if that user belongs to a specific group. So I'm going to get a group. So that I type the group in and enter the group name, and it's going to do a similar thing. It's going to use a different filter, so it's going to display name equals group name, but it's also going to do an expand. So by default, Graph API returns a minimum set of data, and if you want to expand it, more data. So this is an object that's embedded into, or an array that's bedded into the groups object. It wouldn't get pulled back by default, so we need to tell the API to pull that back, and then we're just going to do a get, and it's similar thing to what we did with that. If the group's found, what I'm going to do there is just look in that members list to see if that user exists. So if the user exists, we're going to remove the user from the group. So this time we're going to use the group's endpoint, and we're going to use the ID of the group we found as the index into the array of groups, and then we're going to use the index of the user to index into the array of members, and then delete. And similarly, if we wanted to, the user doesn't exist, we're going to do add them. So it's the same thing. We use the group ID to add them, and then we're just going to create a new directory object and pass that new user ID through just to do it. And then this bit of code is just about testing whether that's worked or not. So that's about a user existing. So all I've done there is either add them or remove them from a group. This bit here now is about the user doesn't exist, so that user when we first found them was null. So what we need to do is do an invite. So got a bit of code here, and this is a bit more complicated. So what we've actually got as part of the documentation for Graph API, it's pretty good. So this is the documentation. You can switch between the beta documentation, so it's kept on the same thing, or the production one. So as we're on the beta API, we'll look at that first. So the first thing that we tend to have is a set of permissions. So we're using the application level, so we need to set these permissions are in least privilege, least to most privilege. So if all you want to do is invite the user, then you need to give them the user invite all permission, and then that allows us to do the invite. So we need to set that up on the application that we, like I did with the read all before. There'll be a user invite all option as well. So we need to add that, and then we have the REST API information, and then there's a nice bit with examples in. So you've got the REST, you've got C#, JavaScript, Objective-C, Java. So pretty handy. There's also, if we look up here somewhere, there will be a link through to, can't see it, the invitation object. So this is showing you the structure of that object, and you can see all the properties that we have there. So what we've got here is we create that invitation object, and it allows us to pass a display name, email address, whether we want a custom email message or not, the redirect URL, and then if we want the custom email message, then we pass that through, and then we do the invite. Now, one thing you need to know about this is once you've done the invite, the user isn't there straight away. I don't know if you noticed when I did the invite on through the portal, it didn't appear straight away. There was a bit of a delay, so we have to wait for it to appear. So all we're doing here is going around the loop and checking to see if that. So this is it's the same code I ran previously, and it's basically waiting for that user to be there. And what I want to do now is once I've got that user, I'm looking at, can I update something on it? So all I'm going to do is say I want to update company name. I'm going to change their company name on the user. So I just call the update async method to do that. The next thing I want to do is actually assign a user to an application. This is a bit more complicated. So it uses things called service principals. So we need to find the service principal that maps through to our application. So that's doing the filter, but we also need to look at all the users that are assigned to it. So that uses the app role assigned to collection. So exactly the same way as groups, except this is using service principals and apps role assigned to. We do the get. I then go and try and find the user in that list. If they're in there, then we're going to remove them. Exactly the same thing I did with groups. So I'm going to use the service principal ID, and I'm going to say if the user that's assigned there, then we do the delete. And similarly, if we want to do an add, we create this app role assignment object. Now this is something to be aware of. This is different in the beta and the production. So if I changed my NuGet package back to production, the code wouldn't compile. I'd have to comment that line out and uncomment this one. So there are differences between the two, and this is basically just passing all the information that we need based upon the application and the user, and that's how you would add a user. And then we pass that through and call the same thing. Instead of calling delete like we called up here, and we call it add and pass that object through. Final thing in this bit is exception handling. So you can get the basic information that you would get from exceptions, but this is actually quite important. You get a lot more information if you look at the real response body. So this is the response coming back from the REST API part. So you'll get a lot more detail in the response body and error. The inner exception and exception messages you don't really get. It's almost like something's gone wrong, and you have to look at the detail to see what's happened there. So that is pretty much it. So I've shown you how we can add applications to Azure AD and then wire those into your web app. So OpenID Connect was fairly straightforward. Added a couple of bits of the client ID and the tenant information was in there. And then by assigning users to that application, we can then log into our website using Azure AD, whether that's an internal user, whether that's B2B user, fairly straightforward. We also create some custom application roles. So when the user was assigned the NASA role, you can see that picture. We've talked about conditional access, multi-factor authentication, entitlement management, and I've finished with showing you how we can automate all that using Graph API. So I hope you found that useful. I'll be hanging around till about 3, so if you have any questions, just give me a shout, write them in the Q&A section, and I'll try and answer them best I can. And just keep an eye on my blogs. So when I find more stuff out about this, I'll blog about it and I'll tweet and whatever. So thank you for listening. Users to that application, we can then.
Hi Steve, just Mike dropping in. I think the guys haven't quite finished the lag on the video, so I think you might want to wait a couple of minutes for Q&A. It was really cool that though, mate.
Cheers.
I think there's a couple in the Q&A window from earlier actually. I don't know if you've spotted.
Yeah, I'll have a look. I've got no questions in my Q&A view.
Oh, if you have a look on the published questions, I can read them out for you, Steve.
Okay, yeah, seen it. Didn't realise there was a tab. Good question. Don't know. So is it possible to let guest users go through their own MFA process? I'm not sure. I think if you've got a user that's set up on your side and they need MFA, then that's part of your tenant, and that will be forced through, I believe. But if they come through to our tenant, then you'll be whatever we suggest. So I think we'll need to set you up on our AD with our own multi-factor. I've not tried that, but that's what I believe is happening. All the activities creating user, yes. So they can all be done through Graph API with a variety of different endpoints. So I showed you inviting a user. Not sure about the setting up actually. So setting up for the application, whether you can do that. I know I'm looking at the moment as part of Entitlement Management. So that part of the B2 API, I can set up access packages and assign the access packages and look at creating policies, that sort of thing. So I'm assuming that you can do the similar sort of thing with creating applications, but I've not looked into that. It's probably something to do actually. Is there any other questions?
Don't think any have popped in yet, mate.
Okay. You got my Christmas tree on screen now then?
I think we're just seeing a live event. I'll continue hold window. I think with your, what we'll do, let me just put you back on the screen. There you go. Got your Christmas tree now.
I've took my jumper off though, haven't I? So.
Well,
I'm not going to put it back on, it's too hot. I'm right next to a radiator, just there's a radiator. So.
Yeah, it looked like your arm just disappeared into the
Christmas
tree.
Yeah, that's the only downside of this. I was doing another talk which I was showing hardware pieces. You can't have a background on for that because they disappear.
Mm. It's a shame you can't have like a chimney with all your Christmas jumper and that on. You could just disappear up the chimney at some point.
Well, I can do that. There we are.
I don't think we've had any other questions pop in there, Steve.
Okay.
How do you find, sort of from like slightly aside from the technical things, how do you find organisations that you sort of speak to are dealing with Azure AD these days? Do you feel that there's, I think the stuff I've seen, well, I think the stuff I've seen is like if it's custom development of say a web app where they're using an app in Azure AD, it feels like IT pros are a lot less sure generally about that scenario versus the one they seem very comfortable with the ones where it's connecting sort of existing enterprise SaaS applications to it. Do you feel that kind of thing as well? Or
yeah, I think most of the stuff we're doing at Rolls-Royce is like commercial applications, so they're quite happy to connect those together. So we just like DocuSign and Workday, all those sorts of big packages that they doing single sign-on for those is like the way to go really. So I'm not sure about the customers. It's not a. I can understand what you're saying. I think it depends on who you talk to. So I think if we're building it ourselves for our customers, then we will build it in as part of with Azure AD as the identity provider anyway, as part of the single sign-on for our organization. So we will expect the users to use that as well. So they don't necessarily know that they're using Azure AD. They just have an email, and if their organization supports it, then they'll automatically use theirs. If not, they'll just get a username and password. So from their point of view, they won't. If they don't have Azure AD, they won't know any different. It'll just be a username and password. So.
Cool, mate. I think there hasn't really been any more questions. Do you want to just wrap up there? Do you want to wait around a little bit longer?
We can wrap up now if nobody's. Is it finished broadcasting now? Is it?
It's just got your video on at the minute.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, we'll leave it there then. So thanks, Mike.
Thanks very much, Steve. So thanks everybody for joining, and we'll hopefully catch you at another session.